They say you can feel the exact moment your life shifts on its axis. For me, it happened in a boardroom iced over by ambition and artificial lighting. The kind of room that smelled of overpriced cologne and cold metal, where success was measured not by the sweat you poured into something, but by how quickly you could tear it down and flip it for profit. Logan Pierce sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, fingers steepled beneath his chin, a faint smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. 38 years old, custom-tailored arrogance, the poster child for the new era of corporate efficiency. He didn't waste time. The moment I sat down, he slid a crisp white envelope across the table toward me like he was offering me dessert after a disappointing meal. "We're bringing in fresh perspectives," he said coolly. "It's time for Ironclad to move beyond its legacy systems." Legacy. That word hung in the air like a funeral bell. I rested my palms flat against the table, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my fingers. I'd sat at this table through market crashes, system failures, and sleepless nights designing the very architecture this company stood on. And now, I was nothing more than a relic. I looked him dead in the eyes. "You know, Logan, the thing about fresh winds is, they tend to turn into hurricanes if you're not careful." He smiled like he'd already sold the wreckage. "Sometimes a hurricane is exactly what a company needs." I stood. Calm. Collected. The storm inside me didn't show. Not yet. 30 minutes to clear out my office, HR told me. I took 15. As I walked through the halls I'd practically built with my own two hands, the faces blurred. Some too afraid to meet my eyes. Others, like Maggie from accounting, watched me pass with wide, disbelieving stares. "Ethan, what's happening?" she whispered. "Time for a fresh breeze," I said under my breath and stepped out into the cold Seattle rain. The drive home was a quiet war zone in my head. No music. No calls. Just the steady drum of rain against the windshield, each drop tapping out the seconds of my former life dying behind me. Emily wasn't home yet. Probably at her sister's, which was for the best. I didn't have the words for this day yet. I set the cardboard box on the kitchen counter. My old coffee mug. A framed photo of Emily and me from a simpler time. And a small, scuffed external hard drive that somehow felt heavier than everything else combined. Then, because old habits die hard, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and headed down to the basement, the place where all my thinking happened before Ironclad even knew my name. While rearranging a shelf, something fell with a soft, forgotten clatter. A small USB drive, its casing faded and chipped, the adhesive tape around it stained and brittle. I crouched down, turned it over. The tape held a single line of handwriting in Rick Lawson's sharp, unmistakable scrawl. "Do not open until it's time." My breath caught. Rick. Founder. Visionary. The old wolf who'd built Ironclad from nothing and taught me everything worth knowing. And his voice, damn it, I could hear it as clearly as if he were standing right behind me. "Some things, Ethan," he once told me over a half-empty bottle of bourbon, "should only be opened when the ship's going down. But know this, once you open it, there's no turning back." I turned the USB over in my hand, feeling the weight of decisions I wasn't ready to make. Then I stood, crossed the room, and placed it carefully into the back of my personal safe. Not today. But soon. And when that day came, I knew, whatever storm Ironclad thought they were bringing, I'd be the one standing in its eye. 2 days. It only took 48 hours for the empire I spent nearly 2 decades building to start crumbling like a rotten foundation under polished marble floors. At first, it was just a few blips in the system, anomalies the fresh-faced consultants assured Logan Pierce were standard transitional hiccups. A few error logs, some client-side latency. Nothing they couldn't optimize. But by the end of the second day, those blips turned into sirens. Ironclad's flagship medical logistics platform, MedCore, went dark. Hospitals across 3 states found their emergency supply chains frozen mid-route. critical medication deliveries halted. ICU floors left waiting for supplies that never arrived. I was in my kitchen that evening, the same battered mug in hand, the same rain painting the windows in cold Seattle patterns, when my phone started vibrating across the countertop. Logan Pierce. I let it ring until the buzzing became unbearable. Then I answered. His voice was raw, strung tight between panic and desperation. Ethan. I need your help. His breathing was uneven. The system's down. MedCore isn't responding. Hospitals are locked out, patients, Ethan, patients are at risk. This is life or death. I took a long, deliberate sip of my coffee before answering. Logan, I said evenly, you made it pretty clear I'm just a legacy artifact. What would I know about keeping your shiny, modern operation running? Silence on the other end. I imagined him in his corner office, tie loosened, panic dripping off him like sweat in a closed room. His voice cracked. Don't do this. You know this isn't about me. These are people's lives. I stared at the USB still locked behind the steel door of my safe. That's the thing, Logan, I murmured. It was never about me either. Or them. It was about the system. And you broke it before you understood how it even worked. I hung up before he could beg. And just like that, the first piece of ironclad snapped loose from its hinges. The next morning, they sent the lawyers. A sleek, black town car pulled up outside my home just as the sun clawed its way through the rain clouds. Two men stepped out, sharply dressed, expensive shoes that didn't quite know how to handle the muddy walkway leading to my door. They introduced themselves with thin smiles and thicker legal jargon. We're here under the authority of Ironclad Technologies, the taller one began, producing a stack of official-looking documents, to recover all company property and intellectual material in your possession. This includes any hardware, external storage devices, or documentation created during your tenure. I didn't even blink. Instead, I reached over to the side table by the door, picked up a simple business card, and handed it to him. My attorney's name is David Hunt, I said coolly. You'll find he's very familiar with the nuances of intellectual property law, and corporate overreach. The man frowned slightly, flipping the card over in his hand. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so it cut through the morning air like a knife. And gentlemen, I added, my tone sharpened to a razor's edge, before you start rattling off more legal threats, I'd suggest reading the licensing agreements. The ones you probably skipped when you were busy gutting the company for quarterly gains. The shorter lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The taller one tried to recover his composure, but the sweat already beading along his hairline told me everything I needed to know. They left without another word. By nightfall, the news was everywhere. Ironclad's primary clients, state-run hospital networks, private medical distributors, were issuing public statements expressing grave concern over the instability of the system. Stock prices began to slip. And then the text started rolling in. From former colleagues, engineers who'd once sat beside me through 70-hour coding weeks. Ethan, what's happening? Did you sabotage it before you left? I stared at the message, shaking my head. I typed my reply carefully, deliberately. No sabotage. They broke it all by themselves. The following day, Logan called again. I didn't answer the first 3 times. But by the 4th, curiosity got the better of me. His voice was a wreck of pride and desperation, barely stitched together. Ethan, he rasped. Listen, name your price. I don't care what it is. Just help us stabilize the system. Hospitals are threatening lawsuits. Clients are dropping contracts left and right. We can't fix this without you. I walked to the window, looking out over the gray horizon, the same storm clouds looming that seemed to have settled permanently over Seattle. Funny, I said. You seem to think a couple of Stanford MBA consultants could handle it just fine. They didn't understand the underlying architecture. No one does. Only you. I let that hang in the air for a moment, savoring the silence. And what would you call me now, Logan? I asked quietly. Still a relic? Still obsolete? His voice dropped to a whisper. I'm sorry, Ethan. I was wrong. Just, tell me what you want. I could have listed demands. A public apology. My position back with triple the salary. Control over the board. But instead, I simply said, you'll know when it's time, and ended the call. I turned back to the safe. My fingers hovered over the keypad. Behind that door, the USB waited. And I wasn't sure anymore if I was afraid to open it, or afraid of what would happen when I did. By the sixth day, the vultures had started circling. Ironclad's stock price wasn't just dipping anymore, it was in free fall. The press caught wind of the chaos, headlines splashed across every business outlet. Ironclad tech on the brink, massive system failures in medical supply chains. Where is Ethan Carter? The architect behind the collapse stays silent. I hadn't left the house in days. Emily watched me carefully, as if she could see the storm brewing just beneath my surface. She didn't ask what was in the safe. Didn't need to. She knew. And that morning, as if summoned by the weight of my own hesitation, a name flashed across my phone that hadn't appeared in years. Rick Lawson. The founder. The old wolf who'd seen more boardroom battles than Logan Pierce could ever hope to survive. The message was simple. Meet me. One last move to play. He chose an old jazz lounge tucked into a forgotten corner of Bellevue. The kind of place where no one asked questions, and the music drowned out whatever dangerous words hung between men over a glass of bourbon. Rick sat alone in a corner booth, back to the wall, nursing a drink like it held all the answers he wasn't ready to share. His hair had gone grayer since I'd last seen him, but his eyes, those damn eyes were the same. Sharp. Calculating. Dangerous. Ethan, he greeted with that familiar half-smile. I was starting to wonder if you'd lost your appetite for finishing what you started. I slid into the booth opposite him, my voice low. This isn't about appetite, Rick. It's about knowing when the game's over. He chuckled, swirling his drink. Oh, son. The game's never over. You just stop playing it long enough to forget whose move it really is. He reached into his briefcase and slid a weathered, leather-bound folder across the table. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was the original licensing agreement from nearly 2 decades ago. My signature. His. Staring back at me was the undeniable truth, I had never transferred full ownership of the core algorithm. I'd licensed it, conditionally. Rick leaned in, his voice barely a whisper over the saxophone solo cutting through the air. They never read the fine print, Ethan. Too busy chasing the next quarter's profits to see the trap right beneath their feet. I swallowed hard, the weight of it all crashing down. And what do you want from me now, Rick? I asked. His eyes glittered. Just to know if you still have it. The room seemed to shrink around us. The USB, he clarified, his voice softer now. You still have it, don't you? My fingers curled under the table, tightening into a fist. I nodded once. But something in his expression changed when I did, a flicker of satisfaction, a faint smirk like a chess master who knew the board was already set for checkmate. And for the first time in days, I wondered, had this all been part of his plan? Day 8. Logan called again. This time, there was no pretense. His voice was hoarse, raw from begging. Triple your salary, he gasped. Your old office, your team, hell, I'll go on national television and say I was wrong. Just come back, Ethan. Fix this before it's too late. I stood in front of the rain-slicked window, watching the storm outside rage like a mirror of the one inside me. Funny how fast the world flipped. Yesterday's relic was today's savior. I raised the phone to my ear, my voice cold as the glass beneath my palm. You think dignity can be bought, Logan? I exhaled slowly, letting each word cut like a knife. The problem isn't that I needed Ironclad to survive. It's that Ironclad has always needed me just to breathe. I ended the call before he could reply. That night, I sat alone in the dim glow of my study. The safe door hung open. The USB rested in my palm, heavier than it had any right to be. My mind churned through every warning Rick had ever given me, every backroom deal, every calculated betrayal. And I began to wonder, what exactly had he locked inside this thing? A blueprint? A kill switch? A resurrection? The decision settled over me like a final winter frost. Tomorrow was day 9. If I was going to make my move, it had to be now. Before the boardroom vultures tore apart the last pieces of what I'd built. Before Rick Lawson's smirk turned into a victory toast over the company's corpse. I placed the USB gently on the desk, staring at it like it held the last heartbeat of the world I once knew. One final move. Checkmate was coming. Day 9. The hours bled together like ink spilled across a contract, messy, irreversible, staining everything it touched. The board was scrambling. Investors were circling like sharks drawn to blood in the water. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Rick Lawson was smiling that damn knowing smile. I was scheduled to meet him again that evening. The deal was on the table, Ironclad's battered corpse, ready for a buyout at a fraction of its worth. One signature away from becoming his trophy, again. But something didn't sit right. I spent the afternoon poring over old files, digging through archived communications and legal documents. And that's when I found it. Hidden in plain sight, buried under corporate jargon and shareholder agreements. A clause buried deep in the original sale of Ironclad to the private equity firm, the one Rick had personally overseen before his retirement. In the event of systemic technological failure persisting beyond 10 consecutive days, original founding parties reserved the right to initiate a buyback at predetermined market value. I sat back, the weight of that sentence crashing down like a fist to the gut. This wasn't just opportunism. This had been engineered. Rick had known. Hell, he'd planned for it. And I'd been just another piece on his board. Moved into position, sacrificed at the right time, all so he could swoop back in and reclaim the empire at a discount. The realization settled over me like ice in my veins. When I walked into that meeting tonight, it wouldn't just be business. It would be war. Rick was already there when I arrived at the same dimly lit lounge, seated in the exact same booth like he owned the place, or worse, like he owned me. This time, he didn't bother with small talk. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "The clause," I confirmed, my voice flat. He leaned back, exhaling a slow breath. "You always were the smartest one in the room, Ethan. Took you long enough to read the fine print." I clenched my jaw, the words bitter on my tongue. "You orchestrated the whole collapse." Rick shrugged, his expression maddeningly calm. "I didn't orchestrate anything. I just knew the inevitable would happen once the wrong hand started pulling the wrong strings. And you, well, you played your part beautifully." "You used me," I said, my voice low but dangerous. "No, son," he corrected smoothly, his eyes colder than I'd ever seen. "I protected my legacy. You're the one who forgot what business really is. It's not about code. It's about control. And the ones who win, Ethan, are the ones who can wait until the board clears itself." He leaned in, voice dropping to a near whisper. "Ka trung ton voi en hung dong code, Ethan. Con toi trung ton voi en hung van ko. Va ku kien nan, luon la kuchien tang." The words echoed like a final verdict. For a moment, I sat there, teetering on the edge of everything I believed in. I could sign the papers, walk back into the company under Rick's shadow, and maybe reclaim some of what I'd lost. But that wasn't victory. That was surrender. And then I remembered. The USB. The last card no one, not even Rick Lawson, knew was still in play. I left the meeting without another word. That night, in the silence of my study, I unlocked the safe and placed the USB into my personal laptop. For a moment, the cursor blinked at me, a silent question. Are you sure? I clicked. What unfolded across the screen left me breathless. It wasn't just code. It was a blueprint for the future. A fully realized, next-generation architecture. Faster. Safer. Unbreakable. Integrasphere. The system that could render Ironclad's outdated infrastructure obsolete overnight. Rick thought he held the final move. But the game had changed. The next morning, I made one phone call. Victoria Hayes, she answered crisply, her voice as sharp and precise as the lines of code that would soon redefine an industry. It's time, I said. A pause. Then a smile I could practically hear through the line. Welcome back to the future, Ethan. By noon, the announcement was live. Meridian Systems had entered a strategic partnership with Ethan Carter, former architect of Ironclad Technologies. Together, we would unveil Integrasphere, a platform capable of revolutionizing the entire medical logistics industry. The media went into a frenzy. Clients began pulling out of Ironclad en masse. And somewhere, in that smoke-filled lounge, I imagined Rick Lawson watching the headlines roll in, realizing for the first time that he had miscalculated. The one piece he never saw coming, was me. The fall of Ironclad was as swift as it was inevitable. Within 72 hours of the Integrasphere announcement, Ironclad's remaining clients, those still clutching to fading contracts, abandoned ship. The stock price plummeted through the floor. What Logan and his army of consultants couldn't destroy in a year, the weight of their arrogance accomplished in a matter of days. On the 10th day, the final day before Rick's buyback clause could be activated, I walked back into the Ironclad boardroom. But this time, I didn't come alone. Victoria Hayes stood at my side, Meridian's executive team flanking her. The papers were ready. And the terms? They weren't up for negotiation. I laid them out in front of the board, my voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. If this company is going to survive, I began, it won't be on the back of private equity vultures and failed leadership. It'll be built by the people who gave it life in the first place. I looked each board member in the eye as I read the terms aloud. The creation of the Ironclad Foundation, a non-profit initiative dedicated to open-sourcing critical portions of our technology for education and public service. A new employee equity program, granting significant ownership stakes to the engineers and workers who'd kept the heart of this company beating through every storm. And finally, a complete dissolution of all executive golden parachutes, including Logan Pierce's severance package. The board voted unanimously. They had no choice. Ironclad, as it once was, died that day. But something better took its place. 2 months later, under the brilliant lights of the Seattle Convention Center, I stood on a stage before thousands of industry leaders, engineers, and journalists. The air buzzed with anticipation as I stepped up to the podium. Behind me, the massive screen displayed a single word in bold, silver letters, Integrasphere. This, I began, my voice steady and clear, isn't just a new system. It's a new way of thinking. A way to ensure that the technology we build serves people first, before profit, before power, before politics. I paused, letting the words settle. And if there's one thing I've learned, I glanced toward the back of the room. There he was. Logan Pierce, half hidden beneath the shadows at the far exit, his face pale, his shoulders slumped under the weight of everything he'd lost. His eyes flickered to the glowing Integrasphere logo, then to me. And in that moment, I saw it, that flicker of realization, the bitter taste of a defeat he'd never seen coming. Sometimes, I continued, locking eyes with the crowd, you have to let something fall apart completely before you can rebuild it into something stronger. The audience erupted in applause. And just like that, the past was behind me. 1 year later. The sun hung low over Lake Washington, the water calm and smooth as glass. Rick Lawson sat beside me in his old fishing boat, his weathered cap pulled low, the familiar scent of his cigar drifting lazily on the breeze. He hadn't brought up Ironclad all day. Not until the sun began to dip below the horizon. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly, his lines slack in the water. "Walking away from it all, leaving the old game behind?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing against the cold, empty shell of the USB drive. It had long since been wiped clean, its purpose fulfilled, its secrets laid bare. I held it up between my fingers, studying it against the fading light. "You know, Rick," I said, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "Some battles you win outright. Others, well, they're just the opening move for a much bigger game." Rick chuckled, low and rough. "Always one move ahead, aren't you, Ethan?" I cast my line back into the water, watching the ripples fade into the distance. "Not ahead, Rick," I murmured. "Just, ready." And as the sky darkened and the stars crept in, I knew, this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning.